Ninjago's animation has been a topic that has been discussed a lot since the release of Season 4 Part 1. It has actually even broken its way out of the Ninjago fandom into a more general sense, as people have been praising just simply how good it looks. But Ninjago's animation has come a long way since its beginning in 2011. The show has never looked bad by any sense, but if you look at the show then compared to now, you can really see how things evolved. And that's something I just want to go over in today's video. Talk about the main stages of Ninjago's animation and talk about the main changes as things went along, and show how we got to the point where we are now. And just honestly, give appreciation to all of the eras of Ninjago in their own sort of way, because I do not think that there's a season that actually does look bad. But I want to ask a question to you guys immediately before we do get into the main bit of this video. What is your favourite era in terms of Ninjago animation? What season do you think looked the best? What season do you think has looked the worst? I would love to know, because there are many options in terms of both categories, because ultimately it's just your own preference on the stylization when it does come to the show. But I am curious on what seasons stand out to you guys in terms of the overall look of it. But apart from that, let me not waste any more of your time, and let's talk about how Ninjago's animation has evolved. Now, of course, Ninjago's animation consistently gets good every single season. This is just down to technology and advancements and budgeting, the likes of all of those aspects. But the thing is that Ninjago has 4 eras in terms of animation that are referred to. You have the classic era of Ninjago, you have the Oni trilogy, you have the 11-minute era, and then you have Dragon's Rising. All of them are the distinct instances where you actually see a jump in terms of how the show looks. I am personally basing the 4 eras that we're going to be talking about on 5 different points in a criteria. I'm going to be talking about the look of the characters, the look of the environment, the lighting, the weight, and the intensity. When I say intensity, I mean stuff like fight scenes and just high-paced situations. All of those, in my opinion, are the main factors that you look for within the animation in Ninjago. Starting with, well, the start of Ninjago. The classic era of the show was animated by Will Film. This is debatably the most basic the show has ever looked, but it's also the most iconic the show has potentially ever looked as well. In terms of the animation of the characters, they were all typically just more of a flat looking character. The thing is that they actually look the most like Lego minifigures, which in a way is actually kind of what you are meant to do. But in terms of just their overall look, they had a fluid nature to them, but they were kind of blocky at times. They also had many instances where they would just have to stay still, or they would just repeat certain animations as a way to save budgets. It was just simple in its nature, and simple doesn't mean bad at all, because it still looked absolutely great. Like I said, it just looked the most flat of the lot, but it makes sense considering that this was the oldest and also the lowest the budget's ever been for the show. The environments were also fairly simple in their nature. You wouldn't ever see much in the way of fauna in more of like a forest or grassland type situation. There was some, but again, for the most part, it was just very simple and to the point. Backgrounds for the most part were just repeats of the same assets, whether they were mountains or buildings. Ninjago City in particular always looked very much the same as it always does. Some scenes just depicted them as just tons of buildings in front of each other. Deserts were often just hilly. There was just never really much to take in. There wasn't necessarily many details to look at beyond just a simple glance. The lighting followed suit, just again being fairly simple in its nature, but again, that's not an indication of it being bad, because the lighting had every season feeling extremely distinct. You could always tell between season 1 from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7. All of them had their own visual feel, and it was great for that reason. Whether it was the more orange hue of Skybound or the more green feel of Possession. The biggest standout for the classic era though for me is definitely the weight of the animation. Not to say again that it's bad, but more in the sense of it just stood out as being really weird in terms of some of their instances. Like, there's so many times where the ninja will be fighting or just doing some sort of general task where the weight will just simply not make much in the way of sense to me. You can mainly see it in fight scenes. So many times where characters are essentially just floating and it just doesn't really work in any way. And spoiler alert, this is very much fixed after this, and it's just so much better. And then lastly is the intensity of it. The classic era also does suffer from a really weird syndrome with certain fight scenes. Not to say that fights within the classic era is bad, it's more just in the sense of there are plenty of times where just simply fight scenes or high pace scenes just really feel too rushed. So many times where a fight will just be the ninja and the villain just randomly flailing their limbs, or a ninja running too fast, or a vehicle just acting strange as well. Just so many really weird moments that just don't really work in my opinion. But it's not like it's the case all of the time, especially when they do focus in on those moments, because there are plenty of fights and plenty of chases and plenty of activities that just look correct. But it definitely did feel like there were times where they just didn't really hit the mark on the head. When I look at these 5 categories at an overall, it does show me that Ninjago had such a very solid foundation going for it. I honestly consider Ninjago's animation in that time to be almost ahead of its time, especially in comparison to some of LEGO's other shows that came out before and after this point. It looks distinctly better than Nexo Knights, or Chima for that matter, and it even looks better than Dreams. But it's not like those shows look bad, it's just Ninjago really just had a very good feel to it. But considering the fact that I consider the most basic of the lot, it's crazy to think that it only goes up from there. Next up comes the era of the Oni trilogy, the shortest run era in terms of animation. But what is interesting is it's still done by Willfilm. They just simply changed the vendor where they did the animation. And honestly, the difference is really night and day in some regards. Character-wise, they all just looked so much more sharp looking. They all looked more distinct. They all just looked really clean. But the thing is that they all still looked quite simple in their nature. No crazy texturing, no crazy instances of design details or anything like that. But that's not bad at all. It just retains the look of LEGO minifigures, which is honestly something that I really like. And the characters, just generally speaking in terms of their animations, they all just looked cleaner, they all just looked more smoother, they all just looked more fluid. They still had those moments where they may have reused animations or something like that, but in the grand scheme, it was a big jump in comparison to where it came before. The environment's got the biggest facelift of the bunch. The detailing in the lands and the cities was honestly incredible. All 3 of those seasons, even though for the most part they're based in Ninjago, all just look so distinctly good looking. The realm of Oni and Dragon looks amazing. Ninjago City looks bursting with life. Honestly, it's so fantastic to see, and it is definitely one of the biggest things that came from this era. The lighting was also a very major improvement, but not just in the environmental sense. One of the things that the Oni trilogy really did excel at was lighting from very distinct sources. For example, when the Sons of Garmadon are riding through Ninjago City at night, you can see the trail of light from the motorbikes as they go through the streets. That is amazing detailing and honestly some of the best stuff we've ever seen throughout the show. But not just that, just moments of using specific lights and how it reflects in terms of the environment around it. Honestly, the excels at doing these things, and I absolutely adore it for that. I would say in terms of the weight, it probably is around about the same, but probably also a little bit better. There are many instances where you can really feel the weight of a situation, but there are also situations where things do just feel a little bit meh. The main thing that comes to mind for me are a lot of the scenes where we actually get to see the Colossus. There's just some instances where it really doesn't feel like it's the weight that it's supposed to be, but it definitely is an improvement, and I do think just on a regular basis there were some big adjustments there. And then finally the intensity. I do think in particular the fight scenes got a major facelift within the Oni trilogy. There are some instances where it feels a lot more simple in nature, but it definitely does excel. There are plenty of fights that I can think of that really do feel good. Lloyd versus Mr. E, Garmadon versus Lloyd, the Ninja versus the Dragon Hunters. There are plenty of moments where they really do feel like they're really getting in there in terms of its animation. So yeah, when it does come to the Oni trilogy, it definitely did improve. There was definitely a lot of good things going for it, and I really do like it because of it. But I will say, what is interesting about the next era is that whilst in a way it's an improvement, it's also not. The 11-minute era actually did change the studio that it was animated from. It went from Will Film to Wildbrain Studios, and with that there did come some more changes in terms of every category that I've talked about so far. Starting off with the characters. The characters actually had a lot of different changes made to them, and honestly, for the good. A lot of their outfits received a lot more texturing. You can see all the ninja sleeves have patterns on them now. You can see that their hair has more distinct lining on it. Honestly, it was pretty good for it, and actually a major improvement. But unfortunately, where the characters improved, I honestly think the environments took a very slight downgrade. Not to say that they look bad, I honestly just think that in the slightest sense, I think the Oni Trilogy's environments just looked more distinct, looked more detailed, looked like I could really spot things in them years after seeing them for the first time. The Wildbrain era still looked absolutely amazing. Ninjago City looked cool, and the extra environments that we saw throughout was also pretty good. But there were tons of times where we saw, for example, just a desert, or something like an ice plains, and it just didn't really feel like all too much. I will say that later on in the Wildbrain era was better. For example, Underwater and Seabound looked amazing, the island looked amazing, Crystallized also looked pretty good. So it definitely did improve, and it was most definitely just growing pains, but it definitely did just feel like the Oni Trilogy on an overall overtook it. I consider this to also be the case as well when it did come to the lighting. The thing is that the lighting did look really good in some shots, and is some of the best shots we've ever seen within Ninjago. The first time we ever saw the 11-minute era was the shot of Wu from the first episode of season 11, and to this very day I consider that to be one of the best shots of Ninjago of all time. But the thing is that whilst we had shots like that in there, we also just had some really terrible looking instances of lighting. I've talked about lighting before within Ninjago, and if you haven't looked at that video, I would recommend you do so. But it's most definitely a case of a plateau with some really good spikes, but also some really low lows. Highs and lows is also the way I would describe the weight during this era as well. There were so many times where you could really feel the weight of the characters. For example, in Master of the Mountain, when the Upply were swinging their weapons, you could really see the weight of the weapons. Same thing with the ninja during that time. However, for all of those times, there were other instances that just felt a little bit off. For example, going back to the first episode of season 11 again, Wu's staff just feels weirdly weightless, and so do the ninja to an extent. There's just so many instances that remind me of the floaty ninja back in the classic era of the show. And again, whilst it's not bad, it just felt like a plateau, or even again a very slight downgrade from the Oni Trilogy. But where all of those plateaus and highs and lows came in, I will say the intensity was really good this time round, and definitely a major improvement. One thing about Wildbrain is that they know how to do a fight. They were amazing at doing this. They actually do more elasticity in terms of the characters, and they actually stretch a lot more because of it. But it allows this really fluid motion that makes all of the fight scenes look absolutely amazing. And I just cannot fault any of them in any sort of sense. They all just really succeed in it, and I just really like how it all looks. The Wildbrain era and the 11-minute era to this very day is still got some of the best things we've ever seen. I mean, of course I'm going to reference this being a Master of the Mountain and a Cole fan, but Cole versus the Skull Sorcerer is still one of the best fight scenes ever. So this was definitely the most tricky instance or a shift in the style of Ninjago in terms of the evolution. Like I said, where it feels like things were always on a major upscale and everything always felt like it was going up in terms of its quality and its evolution, it really did feel like here was a really strange moment of time. It really did feel like things were plateauing and in some ways just kind of going down. And again, it's not like Ninjago ever looked bad. It's just where things were always getting better, this just felt really strange in a lot of different ways. But luckily, there was the end of it after this point in time. Because when we jumped from the 11-minute era to Dragon's Rising, we have gone into, in my opinion, and I think the more common opinion, the best looking era of Ninjago. The show nowadays is absolutely fantastic looking, and has taken every single aspect of the criteria I've talked about and has seriously dialed it up to 100. If it was even possible, they even made the characters more detailed. Honestly, all of the little bits of markings and scuff marks and everything that goes into those suits look absolutely amazing. They feel lived in, they feel worn, and I absolutely adore that. They just look so distinct and vibrant and detailed, and there's honestly just nothing wrong with how the characters look now. It just has that feel that you would expect when it does come to the show. The environments as well just look so good, considering that it felt like the 11-minute era plateaued in terms of the environment. Really nowadays it's just so much better looking. The details, you could look at a scene for hours, as recent like I said with the Whispering Woods. If you look at the Whispering Woods, I guarantee there are more details that you haven't noticed before. Ninjago City also has been shown to actually not look in place with Dragon's Rising anymore because it hasn't been updated yet. At the beginning of season 2, when the ninja are there for a few scenes, they literally look out of place because of how different it all looks in comparison. Honestly, it just looks amazing, and I can't understand how this jump was even possible. The lighting is amazing in all aspects as well. Honestly, to an extent where sometimes the lighting is simply too much. The monastery at times looks too bright, the lighting is that deep. And I love that as well. Lighting has sources reflect off each other, blades reflect on the ninja, and each season feels distinct and vibrant again. You can tell every season apart from each other based purely on its lighting, and it really does succeed at that. The weight is also completely there now with anything and everything. There are no instances in Ninjago where I feel like the weight is just off anymore. It feels like everything actually is what it's meant to be. The swing of Raz's hammer, to Lloyd using his elemental powers, to Aaron reacting when using object spin jutsu. It all just feels like it's naturally occurring, and I just like that they've really balanced it out. And then finally, the intensity. Like I said, one of the highlights was the 11-minute era in terms of the fight scenes, having that fluidity to it. But Dragon's Rising took all of that and improved on it and just simply added to it. Took the fluidity, the smoothness, and made it better. But then also added long shots, added one takes, added dynamic angles, and it really does just work. The fights feel deep, they feel dynamic, they feel intimate. It really does work in every sort of sense. Honestly, the fight scenes are the reason why Ninjago's animation has broken through to a more general audience, because they simply are that good. So when it comes down to it, this is the perfect representation of the evolution when it does come to Ninjago's animation. The fact is that we have gone from a show that was more simple in its nature, had really weird weight, had really simple lighting, had honestly really standardized looking things. But nowadays we have a show that just looks in depth, looks detailed, looks dynamic, looks smooth, looks functional, looks embraced in all of its aspects, and I just can't help but love it. I just love the fact that the show really can be shown to be something that has moved along with the course of time, and most definitely for the better. Ninjago's animation is just something that needs to be cherished. It really does. It's just something that really does function in so many more ways than one. And I just absolutely love that fact. I love the fact that this show has continued to prove why it's absolutely amazing, and I just can't help but appreciate it for that. And appreciate over anything the animators. Even though I've commented on the quality of the older eras of the show, I still have nothing but respect for both of the animation studios behind this show. They really have put their all into it, and I can't help but appreciate them enough. So if for some reason or somehow anyone from Wildbrain or Willfilm are watching, thank you very much. But with all of that, I honestly just don't have too much more to say. I think over time Ninjago's animation has just been distinctly shown to become better. Of course, like I said, being plateaus, but I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing. I don't think the season has ever dipped in quality, and I think that is the main thing. But like I said at the start of the video, this is where I want to know from you guys. What is your favorite era of the show? What is the best instance of animation you've seen within the show? I would love to know. But apart from all of that, thank you very much for watching the video, and I do hope you enjoyed. And if you did, please consider subscribing. I love discussing Ninjago with more people. And if you do want to support the channel any further, which you do not have to, you could always become a channel member and join the legends that you see on screen. Each of you, your support means the absolute world to me, and I cannot thank you enough. But apart from all of that, thank you very much and take care. Okay, bye!